So the Obermann Center supports the research work of the University of Iowa faculty and students, and the Obermann Conversation Series with the partnership of the Iowa City Public Library pairs University of Iowa faculty with thought leaders in the community. Learning from each other and delighting in the combined knowledge of academics and practitioners are the goals of this program. The structure of today's event will be for the panelists to discuss amongst themselves, and then towards the end of the event, we will open it up to questions from the audience. So before we get started with the program, I'd like to introduce Candace Smith, one of the librarians here, to say a few words.
Thank you. I also just wanted to start by saying a few things. First of all, thank you all for being here. This is one of our intellectual freedom events that we hold every year, so thank you so much for being here, and thank you to the Obermann Center and our panelists today. I think we have a really good program today, and I just want to say that we all know that the topic we're talking about today has been a bit of a hot issue lately, and so I wanted to start by saying that the library is a space for all voices, and we believe that everybody's voice has the right to express their opinion free from fear, bullying, and harassment of any kind. We might not agree with what everybody chooses to say, although it looks like a pretty friendly crowd so far, but we should agree to remain respectful and promote a productive conversation. And more specific than that, during a Q&A, if we get around to that, we want everyone to have a chance to ask their questions, but make sure that they're legitimate and true to the subject being discussed. While we absolutely welcome those who have differing viewpoints, we don't welcome actions or statements that are threatening or disruptive to the program or anything else that's being said here. And so that's just sort of a little ground rule. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Lauren.
Thank you. All right, so now I'd like to introduce, or rather have our panel introduce themselves. We have some fabulous speakers here today. So if you all wouldn't mind, maybe just starting with Sam and going down and introducing yourselves and kind of how you came to this topic.
Can you all hear me okay? Thank you for being in community with us today. This is a topic near my heart, and so to see your time and attention devoted to it means a lot. I am Sam Helmick. I am the Community and Access Services Coordinator for the Iowa City Public Library, which means that I resource the great people on 3 separate teams: the public relations and marketing, the circulation, and the outreach in the bookmobile. I rest on the laurels of a lot of great people here that provide services to the community. I am the Iowa Library Association's president and their former intellectual freedom chair, so I've been around the state for the past several years trying to support communities through everything from actual book burns to reconsideration processes. I also sit on the American Library Association's executive board. And lastly, I was the former chair of the Governor's Commission of Libraries, so that governmental element of transparency and oversight has been a useful experience for me too.
All right, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is John Kenyon. I'm the executive director of the Iowa City UNESCO City of Literature organization. Our organization manages the designation that UNESCO has bestowed upon Iowa City as one of the 42 cities of literature in the world. And one of the big parts of our charge is the protection and promotion of intellectual freedom. And so today is very much filling in for part of what we do. And folks may have seen that we put together an open letter speaking to this issue of SF 496, and pretty much states our views and goals related to that issue, and so have very much been on the forefront of this conversation and look forward to being more a part of it today. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Josh Coleman. I'm an assistant professor of English education here at the University of Iowa. I come to this work from a very personal place. I was raised in the Deep South to fundamentalist parents who fastidiously controlled everything that I had access to. It wasn't until I was in college that I was able to see representations of myself in literature, and so now as a professor, I work to ensure that every child can see themselves represented in the books in their classroom. I am currently a Spencer postdoctoral fellow. I am funded by the National Academy of Education to do a research project on the implementation of SF 496 and to understand the stories of folks who are out in classrooms every day, teachers, librarians, and how they are doing the absolute best that they can to ensure that these books are getting into the hands of young people. So nice to meet you all.
My name is Jackie Biger. Can you hear me okay? All right. I'm Associate Professor of Instruction in the School of Library and Information Science. I have a background as a public librarian. I'm running children and youth services, and also as a school librarian, both in a high school and an elementary school setting. I am the program coordinator for school librarians in the program, so that involves both instruction of coursework and preparing people to be school librarians, and also observations of practicums. And I serve on a statewide teacher librarianship leadership team as well.
All right, thank you all. I'm so glad you all can be in the same room today to talk about this topic. So to get us started, I was hoping that maybe Sam, if you could explain what's new and what's old about book banning in Iowa. And also any other panelists, feel free to say what they want to say too.
Right. So when we think about book banning, it's a very abstract term, right? Because you have criticism, you have challenge, you have censorship, you have restriction, you have removal, right? So it runs the gambit when we use that term, ban. And so I think it's important to remember we have a very strong history with book bans. It's not just that scene in The Music Man or Field of Dreams. We are historically known for our intellectual freedom roots because we were the founders of the Library's Bill of Rights. And the Library Bill of Rights were written in Des Moines by Director Forrest Spalding of their public library around 1938, and they give us our core ethics and values. It reminds us that meeting spaces and materials and access to the library belongs to everybody. And this came from some really good work that we all involve ourselves in now, self-examination, understanding his privilege, understanding the mistakes that he had made along the way, understanding that before he had impressed upon himself that we needed core values in librarianship, he used to ban books like Mein Kampf from the shelves so that we couldn't examine those harder ideas. He used to ban German immigrants from using our meeting rooms, and so with re-examination, he understood that we needed core values and ethics. And so he wrote those in 1938, and they were adopted nationally at the American Library Association's conference in 1939, which is always a joy for me to rub in their faces when I'm at conference. But this also means we have an incredible legacy to uphold, right? And we do a pretty good job at it. But right now we've noticed that the Overton window has diminished, and we're understanding that a pendulum swing is coming back. And I would suggest that this is a little different. This is a little different from the religious scare of the 1980s. I think this is a little different because we're seeing physical books being burned. We're seeing legislation that is incredibly library and education adverse. But then I think we have to hold space for this idea as we hold this conversation today. The civil rights movement, the next one, will be taking place in the informational spaces, right? Because we live in the information age. So whether it's a school, or it's a newspaper, or it's a public library, this fight was coming to us, and I think that we're prepared for it, or that we are doing that work today. Does that honor your question?
Yes, I think that
Awesome.
absolutely does honor the question. Would anyone like to speak about then what kinds of book bans are going on right now?
There's two different elements to SF 496 that I think are really important to discuss. One of them is discussion of removal of books that have sex acts as defined in the code. And the other one is and I want to make sure I read the wording of this. I wrote it down to make sure. A school district shall not provide any program, curriculum, test, survey, questionnaire, promotion, or instruction relating to gender identification or sexual orientation in K through 6th grade. And that one is, we're seeing that responding to in a lot of different ways, and I'll hold off on explaining that. But those are two different facets that are taking place in the school libraries right now. So there's this removal of books that have this very specific definition of a sex act that's in the code. And that is in secondary library spaces, because the term age appropriate has always existed in library collections. The role of a school librarian has always been to choose age appropriate books for their school libraries. So that is not a new term. I think that people are kind of latching onto that idea, and it's something that is a responsive term to your community and understanding your readers. And of course, as an elementary school librarian, you're going to be picking things that are appropriate for K through 6th grade, right? You're not going to be introducing books that have sex acts in that space. But the idea here, the second part, is hazier and less clear. And there's a lot of what we're seeing is that different districts are interpreting it in different ways. And so that can look like the removal of any book with an LGBTQ character, because exposure could be seen as promotion in some of the school districts. And that is a really scary, to me, space to identify.
And can I add just a touch of context?
Yes.
This is also taking place when House File 672 passed, which removed some of the credentials for teacher librarians, right? So if you were a page over the summer in high school and shelved books, you now actually have the credentials to be a media specialist or a teacher librarian in a school district, because the teaching degree and the librarian degree was removed. Is that accurate?
It is removed, but the endorsement still exists. So I want to be very clear that you can still become an endorsed school librarian, and that involves having a teaching degree and then also having this education in library science. And so that endorsement is preparing you for both lenses that the school librarian plays. I don't want to jump ahead to your question. Is that okay if I go?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And so a school librarian who has this teaching license and this endorsement is primed for this role as a school librarian. A school librarian is not just somebody who sits at a desk and checks out books all day, okay? And I think that is often what people kind of conceptualize, and maybe they have a conception of their media secretary in their mind when they're thinking of that, which is also a very important role, and I do not want to diminish that role, because that's how a really strong school library program functions, is to have people in this space doing these things. But a school librarian is there to also teach inquiry lessons, to teach how to read nonfiction text structures, how to research, how to find access to reliable information, how to use your technology, how to log in, how to communicate, how to use Google Docs, how to use Google Slides. There's all of this robust integration that's taking place in schools, and the school librarian is truly an interdisciplinary person who's there to help all the departments, to help all the teachers, help the students, help everybody create this education space. And the library program, the library space itself, is for every single person in that school. So the collection development aspect of that is just one aspect of what a school librarian does. And so they are selecting books based upon their budget, based upon their community, their space, their needs, and they're constantly evaluating, reevaluating, and working to build really strong relationships. And so I really think it's important that we understand what a school librarian does for a community in this conversation, because it is so much more. And what we're seeing happen is that in some school districts, they've closed the library, and the school librarians are just sitting and reading every book to make sure that it follows this law. There's no teaching happening. There's no books being checked out. There's no collaboration taking place. They are missing huge opportunities of learning and growth. And we're seeing entire libraries being closed off until people can wrap their heads around what's happening. And I'm taking too much of the floor, so I'll stop for a moment.
Well, I think you've brought us to a good place to speak a little bit about the different ways that these bans are being enacted or thought of in different districts across the state. It doesn't seem like they're all taking the same approach, so I was wondering if the panel could speak to the different approaches that are being taken.
Yeah, I might be best suited to speak here. So yeah, one thing I want to emphasize, book banning is not a new phenomena, right? It has existed in many forms, from silent bans where you take a book off the shelf and simply don't return it, more sort of broad ones, as Sam mentioned, where you literally take them and burn them on Facebook Live, right? Book banning is not new, but the scale that we are seeing today is absolutely new. And it also is a type of legislation that targets particular kids. It targets trans kids, queer kids, kids of color, Black kids, Indigenous kids, right? These books are taken off the shelves at much higher rates than other similar types of books. So I want to sort of name that as part of what is new, right? For so long, diverse children's literature wasn't thought of as existing. It has existed. It has a beautiful history, and it has been filtering into schools in wonderful ways, and now it's being actively legislated and removed from those teaching contexts. So being able to inscribe in law that you cannot talk about sexual orientation or gender identity in a K-6 classroom, and then having certain districts who interpret that to mean K-12. The law says K-6, but districts are making policy that extends it all the way up into K-12. So if you're trying to bring in a current historical figure, I was thinking about picture books recently. How do we get people, students can be agentic. They can talk about queer people. They can talk about trans people, even if teachers cannot. So how do we get students to that point? Can we actually talk about Pete Buttigieg, right? Or do we just have to omit aspects of who he is, aspects of his campaign, aspects of his family life? And Pete Buttigieg is not my favorite person in the world, but to have a contemporary Secretary of Transportation and you're unable to even talk about that person, or as a teacher, you're worried about doing it, that is something very unique and new. The law, as Jackie read, is quite vague and it's being interpreted wildly, sometimes in quite narrow ways that afford agency and create space for teachers to do the work of honoring each child in their classroom, and sometimes extremely broadly to remove any sort of text that even has a tertiary or secondary type of queer character in it. Or recently, The Hate U Give was removed, and there's no sex act in The Hate U Give. Why was it removed? What was it? That's not within the framework of the law. That was an interpretive act by someone who was making that decision. So I say all this to say there's a lot happening. It's widely varied. And each teacher I talk to right now has a different approach. There's a lot going on in this state.
Well, and then to, again, add some more context with legislation, this is the same year that House File 802 that defined education about sex, education about orientation, critical race theory as a divisive concept. So I think that we have to hold space that this is happening on multiple fronts, right? We're not teaching people to think, we're teaching them what to think, and we're suggesting that in places where the plurality and pure mutations of thought should be celebrated and competed against each other and examined, they're actually divisive and therefore do not hold space, which is complex because if we can't galvanize our students to have these conversations here, I'm not sure that there will be space for them in the graduate space. And then I would like to just share that the work of the Iowa Library Association was to work with the Iowa Association of School Librarians, because I'm not a school librarian, folks. I don't know how it's done. Sorry, Jackie, I don't know how it's done. And we surveyed them to ask, okay, if we can help you reach the Department of Ed and write them a letter of inquiry about this bill and take out pieces that we need specificity on, would you help us? And they said definitely. And so we surveyed our teacher librarians around the state. We wrote something called a letter of inquiry, which felt fancy when I wrote it. And we sent it to the Department of Ed. And Director Chase Aldiz said, thank you, this is incredibly proactive. We're going to use this for our guidance when we send it out. And 2 weeks later, he was gone. I'm trying to not connect those dots. I don't think it was personal. And then we sent it to the educational director, Snow, and we haven't heard anything, which has left our curriculum developers and our teacher librarians and our school boards in a pickle, right? Because you can't paint yourself out of a corner.
Well, to bring a cynical point of view, it feels as if, as a layperson in terms of librarians or educators, that the vagueness was obviously by design to leave it open so that it would be overinterpreted, which has been the case. If some of the things that have taken place had actually been part of the legislation, it's possible it might not have passed. I don't know with the way the legislature is currently put together. But now the bounds of what this law states have been stretched enough that they could go back and change it and codify what has taken place, because they could say that's already how it's being put into play. They could go farther, knowing that educators with that vagueness are willing to do some of these things that they maybe hadn't dreamed or hoped of being able to pass in the last legislative session. So, you know, the vagueness is baked in and is part of why it has been so dangerous and so harmful for educators to try to figure out and interpret on their own. We saw the instance of the educator, I believe it was in Mason City, using AI to try to figure out what books to ban, and was immediately demonized, and then came back and said, but here's why. I'm trying to go against something that is so vague that I don't know how to go about doing it, and you can fall on either side of that, but it just shows that we're putting our educators and our teacher librarians into quite a pickle trying to figure out how to interpret this on top of the negative effects that are already there.
But it gets worse. Let's put them in a deeper pickle. We're seeing this DeSantis playbook unfold in Iowa, right? This is exactly what we saw in Florida the year before. So we could probably pay a cheaper tuition if we pay attention to that, right? But what has now befallen our teacher librarians is that the school districts are getting sued, potentially the teachers are getting sued, because when they do remove the books without guidance, they're making that choice and they're potentially violating the author or the student or the caregiver's First Amendment right. So let's put those teachers right between a rock and a hard place, lose your job or get sued, right? I just wanted to bring some extra joy. I hope that's okay.
One thing, just a very quick comment, is as we're talking about interpretation and how we're taking up this law, how it's being implemented, something really important to know is that the Department of Education has provided no guidance, right? So while teachers and librarians are putting so much labor and time into trying to be there for kids, to maintain, to keep their jobs, there has been no guidance top down to help them understand what is actually expected of them as they continue to do this work. So that's just a little context I want to provide as we keep talking about this.
Thank you. So I was also wondering if you all could discuss what reconsideration policies are for these and the ones that already exist, but maybe also how they've changed.
Yeah, I'll start. So reconsideration policies, many school districts already had these in place. And in fact, I believe that became part of this law as well, that you must have a reconsideration policy. And that was a way for somebody to voice a concern about curriculum, library materials, and it's a system that worked really well. So you would fill out this form, paperwork, there would be a whole committee that would gather together. Everyone would read the piece in its entirety to understand the context of what it is that may be troublesome. And then there would be a robust conversation about the place that that material has in school, in the library, and then there'd be a decision made on if it was to be removed. And this is a great system. This is how I think, good conversations and choices should be made. School librarians are humans. They may have made a mistake when it came to collection development. Part of being a school librarian is also weeding your collection and going back and thinking about, is this appropriate? Is this offensive? Have, our language changed? Is this something I want in my collection anymore? Is Pluto a planet? All of these things that we take into consideration when we're trying to decide whether we keep a book in the collection or not. So that is part of our job, is to already thoughtfully reconsider things. And sometimes it comes from somebody's bringing in a concern. And that is how it always has worked. So part of the thing that's frustrating about this is this removal is taking place without any conversation of the context of the writing and the art of the book, right? In this novel that's been thoughtfully edited and published and provided as a piece of teaching or a piece of reading for somebody's reading life, which is a really important part for all of our students to have independent reading lives.
So I guess if I were to add to that, most of your public libraries have reconsideration policies and procedures as well. And it's a good thing because it's a grievance. And a grievance in your government is actually a First Amendment right. We were prepared for this and created processes in place for us to do this good work in community together, right? Because libraries are reflections of the communities that they serve. Our job is to represent and affirm, not to promote. You come in here and you explore the spaces and you figure out what your intellectual paths are going to be, and we are thought partners and supporters to you. And so it's important to remember that local control and that community trust has been robust and really a positive experience. And I'll give you an example. I love the reconsideration process that happened at the Iowa Community School District, because I'd never thought of the reverse Uno. I'd never thought of it. Typically, a book will be challenged. It may reach to a reconsideration process, and then they'll say, you know what, this isn't a right fit, we're going to remove it, which is a First Amendment right, or you know what, we're going to keep it. Iowa City said, we liked it so much and we really considered it, we actually think it needs to be in more spaces. I'm like, sometimes that's the answer, but having been in libraries for 15 years, I never would have come up with that. And I think it's important to remember that that's a reflection of the community, right? Those were their thoughts, library civilians' thoughts, that they thought that this was important because this is their library. And I would remind you that it's important to understand that reconsideration processes exist both in the school and the public spaces, because public libraries are next. We're looking at Pella right now that has a referendum on the ballot to have the city council choose all of the books in their library. One of the books, I mean, one of the bills that we did get to shoot down this year was all city councils would now take over the collection development of public libraries. That was one that was proposed, and it will be coming back. And then I would just remind you that what affects one of us affects us all. When we raise our children in school districts with libraries that are segregated this way, right? What public library experience are they going to have in the years to come? How are they learning to use those spaces?
Well, I was just going to jump in because I sat on the reconsideration committee in Iowa City.
Nice.
So I can't take credit for that particular idea, but I certainly endorsed it. But, and all of this really seems like a solution in search of a problem, because as has been stated, these reconsideration committees, these reconsideration policies have been on the books for years. They've been used. In Iowa City, it hadn't been used in, I think, 20 years, they told me. But there was a situation where the book was removed from the shelves, and so they convened a committee. I was asked to sit on that, and we had a very thoughtful discussion about the book. We decided to keep it. In fact, we decided that it is something that should be more available. And a big reason why we decided it should be more available was because of the input of high school students that sat on the committee. The way the committee was composed, there were educators, there were teacher librarians, there were people like myself from the public, and then there were 2 students. And the book was Juno Dawson's This Book is Gay, as you probably remember from the news. And I remember reading through it and thinking about whether I thought it should be on a junior high school shelf or high school shelf. And, that was what we were being asked to consider. And these students very eloquently explained to all of us why these books definitely needed to be on those shelves, because of the time in a kid's life when they really start to think about these issues, and they need that information, and how valuable it is to have vetted information that is written in a way that appeals to the students, that speaks to them in their language, and that it very much needed to be on those shelves. So I was devastated when I saw in 496 that it says that it prohibits students from serving on any committee that determines or provides a recommendation related to whether materials should be removed from a school library. So the 2 most valuable voices in that conversation that we had this spring are now legally prohibited from serving in that role, which is ridiculous, of course. And so it's, again, it's there, the process is there, but they've even made the process worse rather than just leaving it alone to do the job it was set out to do. So, sorry, Josh, go ahead.
No, you jumped to the exact point I was going to make. And maybe I'll just sort of leave it with a question, right? I alluded earlier to there are moments when teachers cannot say certain things in classrooms right now, but students have the agency to bring those topics in. What does it then mean when you remove those voices from that space? Why would you do that? So I might just leave that question in the air.
Yeah, thank you. Well, maybe to take a little bit of a turn to, I was wondering if you all could just talk about like a commonly or what commonly or historically banned book is most surprising as to the reason why? Maybe we could have a little bit of levity if there's one that's particularly funny.
I just learned one today because I was at a different discussion for Banned Books Week, and this woman brought her Halloween costume to a Banned Books Week discussion, which was the coolest thing ever, frankly, because I've not had that happen before. She was dressed as Charlotte's Web. I had no idea this was a banned book, but it was because it was super highfalutin and we cannot put animals at the same level as human beings. And she actually showed me like where it was banned throughout history. I'm like, does that mean no more Scooby-Doo? This is very upsetting to me right now. But if you'd like to see her really wonderful Halloween costume, apparently the scariest thing you can dress up in Iowa this year is a banned book. So that's my favorite.
Well, I'm going to pass if you guys have any. I have to think.
I know I shared this one before. I always think this one cracks me up because it's like the little engine that could. Every time I think it doesn't matter anymore, it like pops back up on the American Library Association's top 10 most challenged books, and that's And Tango Makes Three. So if you know, it's like a very innocuous little picture book about these two penguins that's based on real penguins that are in a zoo, I believe in the Bronx, but in Central Park. Thank you. Thank you. This is Dr. Subablock, who knows just as much, if not way more, about children's literature than I do. So please chime in.
Did you know Mr. Richardson's going to be at the Beaverdale Books Festival on Saturday in Des Moines? You can get Tango Makes Three signed if you want to.
That's great. And then you can have someone ban it so it keeps popping up on the top 10 list. No, it's just such an innocuous little tale that's based on these true two penguins that raise a little penguin, and they're like both man penguins, and people were just mad, and they stay mad about these little penguins. And it's such an uninteresting book. I'm sorry, I know people probably love it. I think it's so ridiculously uninteresting, but people have a lot of feelings about that picture book. So that's the one that always, I'm like, I thought we were done, and we weren't, right? Like, it always comes back.
I have a hard time with this question because I do like to respect people's opinions. So like, although I personally may think a book is beautifully written or wonderful, or I love a good fantasy, I understand how someone may not, want that for their child. So I don't know, it's hard for me to answer that question. I think it's hold space for the fact that everybody has opinions and we are all allowed to react to books in different ways.
Yes, that was very nicely said. So I was hoping then if you could tell us where community members, librarians, teachers find agency in this moment to make change in their communities. What can Iowans do?
I think a lot of teachers and librarians are feeling scared and angry and silenced. So I would encourage you, if you know somebody who is a teacher or a school librarian, talk to them and ask them if there's anything that they feel like you could be their voice for them, and you could take things to conversation. A lot of people are really wanting I always say this word wrong, anonymous, but.
You got it.
Okay. I always trip that word up in my head. People, are respect that somebody may not want to put their name and their job on the line, but that they do want to share their story. They want you to know what's happening in their classrooms and their spaces, and they are being, instructed by their superintendents and their districts. They do work, they're employees of their school district, so they are needing to follow what their employees or bosses are telling them to do. And it's hard when you maybe ethically don't feel like that is what you want to be doing.
I got stuff, but I've been talking a lot, so, yeah.
Well, I would just build on what Jackie was saying about showing support publicly for things.
Yeah.
Our organization, as I had mentioned earlier, put together this open letter to the governor and the legislature talking about this issue and about the need for freedom of expression and to allow students to have access to materials. And I was joking with Sam earlier that I assume, it ran in the Gazette this morning, and I assume that the governor read that and then thought, oh, I've been wrong about this entire time. Let's change. I know that's obviously not going to happen, but the fact that all the signatories on this letter represent thousands of Iowans who all vote, who all can express their own opinions, it has merit. It does let people know. It lets the people on the front lines know that there are people that have their back who are paying attention to this issue. It lets legislators know that we noticed what they did. One of the worst things that can happen is that legislation like this passes and people just think, well, there's nothing we can do. I guess we'll just have to soldier on. And instead, that's when they need to double down. That's when they need to really raise their voices and let people know that not only was that not acceptable, but we're going to fight and claw back the things that you've done previously. So I think it's really just being brave enough to show that public face, to put your name to things if you can. I know not everyone can. And just to let people know that we are paying attention and we don't forget.
I might just sort of dovetail on that. Please go and get involved, or at least know who is on your school board. Right? Often these elections are won by small majorities or small groups of people who come together. I recently heard about a group in one part of Iowa who there were 3 seats that were upset by one sort of more conservative group that wanted particular books. They won 3 seats on the school board, right? Because they consolidated and worked together. So please go and get involved. Please know who and support and vote for people who can work for you, right? And who are going to make sure that intellectual freedom remains something that is important within the school system and the districts that you're working in. A couple of other things that I've been thinking a lot about as I'm talking to many teachers and librarians is where do we locate agency in these moments? I always believe that teachers have agency. It just looks like many different things. How you interpret this law is a way of asserting your agency. When the law says you can't talk about sexual orientation and gender identity in K-6, and your district says that's through K-12, no, that's outside the law, right? I don't have to do that. Right? Be very attentive to the ways in which you're taking in this work, right? Push back when you can. And the other thing that I want to say as someone who comes from the teacher education space, I have learned so very much from the librarians that I have been working with in the last couple of months. Librarians, from my experience, have many procedures, protocols. They are ready to confront book bans in ways that, speaking from my own experience as a teacher, I was not. I did not know about reconsideration committees. I didn't know about the policies and procedures. So if you're in teacher education, reach out to your colleagues, to the people who are around you in your community who might be differently or better prepared to address these book bans. To me, right now, I am working with my librarians, right? They are teaching me every single day, right? Be in community.
Oh, I think there are a couple of veins, and you all have covered them quite lovely, but so much of it is that presence is powerful, right? Your time today, your attention to this, the fact that you're learning about what is taking place means that you were better equipped to bring your voice to it, to sit at the table for it, and to contribute to the direction you wish as Iowans for it to go. So like air fives to all of you. Nicely done. I think the second piece, though, is coalition building. So we being Iowa Library Association, just signed off on a memorandum of agreement with Annie's Foundation. Is everybody aware of Annie's Foundation? Annie's Foundation is a nonprofit organization. It's about 2 or 3 years old, and they give away banned books throughout Iowa. In fact, last night they reported they've given away 8,000 banned books this year. And they are an organization that was created in honor of a teacher librarian named Annie, who was really a champion for intellectual freedom, but lost her fight to cancer. And so they do this work in honor of her, and I don't think they could have possibly anticipated how busy they would be doing this work. So finding nonprofit groups like that that are doing the work that can speak up for us, and then enabling them as activists and community organizers to do the work that librarians and library workers can't. So our memorandum of agreement essentially is there's an anonymous form now that teacher librarians will be able to use to tell us what percentage of your collections have been restricted, what percentage of your collections have been removed, what happened to the removed books that tax dollars paid for, what criteria was applied to make these decisions, because that's going to equip me as the ILA president to go to these committee hearings again this year and say, here's the stats. This law was supposed to give us more transparency and oversight, and it has done the absolute opposite, and here are some of the impacts. But it's also the group that leaks things like the Urbandale or Urbandale School District's long list of banned books. That's not something the Iowa Library Association is in the business of doing, but they can. And so by anonymizing this, we're giving a voice to the teacher librarians. We're enabling us to have some data to do this good work that we know we'll have to continue for many years to come. But then we're also making sure that you're aware. So presence is powerful. Please know your community groups and your organizations, and please use your voice, because again, this is our legacy. The Library Bill of Rights, intellectual freedom, these are things that we have vanguarded and championed, and I think we can take them into the next generation. I really do. I'm confident. I trust y'all.
Thank you all so much. That was fabulous. So I wanted to open the floor to questions from the audience. And Candace will be taking the mic around. So please wait for the microphone because we're live streaming, so it's easier for people online to hear.
I feel like I need to educate myself better on these laws that have been passed. So, so that I understand if somebody stretches it beyond even what has been passed. What is a good website or a site where I can learn what's actually in the law?
John, do you want to?
Well, I mean, if you just look up Iowa Code, Senate File 496 for the last legislative session, they have it in a nice memo form for you that you can read through. It's the place that I have found. I'm happy, Mary Lou, to let you look at my heavily noted and highlighted version. Yeah. But, I mean, it's the best place to find what's actually there in law. I mean, it's like, as we've talked, you know, the newspapers have done an okay job, and the media have done an okay job of reporting on the broad strokes, but to actually know specifically what is in there so that you can avoid the problems of overreach or vagueness, it's, you know, it's right there.
There's also a bill tracker, ialobby.com, but I will tell you, our lobbyists locally and nationally are struggling to keep up, folks. That's why I would definitely refer to your resource, because you can go and look at past editions and see how quickly language changes and decisions are made without much oversight or review.
I might also just give a quick shout out. Yesterday there was a wonderful talk by Keenan Crow, who gave a beautiful overview of the law, how things have changed in the last couple of years, and really isolated a number of the details. And I do believe that that's archived within the Iowa City Public Library online. I'm looking to the wonderful.
Here comes Bonnie.
If you go to the library's YouTube channel, you can watch that program. It's youtube.com/the library channel.
See, this is why I love librarians. Right? Like, it's
That was a
immediate, right?
superhero entrance.
I'm streaming this one right now. Go watch it later.
This is very meta.
Yeah.
Well, I have a question as far as discussing banned books, for example. Why is it, okay, I understand that we're not a theocracy, so therefore there's no promoting of any religion as per the state, depending on the interpretation of the Constitution. But yet, the Bible cannot be read, and this is I was actually told in a training class to be a substitute teacher, that you cannot read the Bible. Even in the break room, can't even look at it, because it could potentially cause an issue, and you could possibly be called into the office and be informed that you may even could possibly be terminated. Not to say that's a definitive, because it's a contractual situation, but how is that any different than banning the books that you're, of course, because I have no problem. I actually believe in the freedom of speech and the idea of protecting all forms of art, even art that we don't always agree with. But why is it that it's so hard for people to wrap their head around that, but they can wrap their head around this?
While I would love to speak to that experience, I can only speak to my own. And so my own is dealing with the legislation that's at hand and trying to navigate those waters. But then I have been an adjunct professor for public institutions and can tell you that I actually have done devotionals at work. So that has not been my lived experience, and I'm sort of curious if a little bit of investigation into that might serve us to know and appreciate deeper context, because that has not been my experience as a public educator in this state and as a practicing Christian.
Yeah, I would also say that doesn't comport with a lot of the stories that I'm hearing. In fact, the Bible has gotten religious exemption from many of these laws, even though by its own criteria of the law that defines a sex act, it would never be allowed in schools. So in some regards, I guess this speaks to how vague the law is and how different the regional value systems are at play and how people interpret that law, and how that then seeps out into the roles that teachers, substitutes, and students are able to sort of inhabit relative to different books. So I'm actually seeing hearing a little bit of a different story in that regard.
I think a lot of it more has to do with it's just explaining that you could potentially, because it was a training class, it wasn't actually specifically working in a school district, but each school district's a little different. Like, for example, if somebody were to substitute Riverside, Iowa, they might be a little looser with that than maybe Iowa City, where Iowa City, they're more, well, let's just say, they have a point of view and they're like, we don't want to hear any other point of view other than our own. Unfortunately, seems to be my experience. And I live in this community. I can't tell you how many times I've been reading a book by, let's say, Jordan Peterson, for example. I've gotten dirty looks. I've gotten almost run into. Is this an accident? Is this in my mind? I mean, I just would like somebody to, I would like to redress my grievances with my community members when I don't even feel like I'm even really a member of this community anymore. I'm like, what exactly? I mean, I understand, okay, people hated Trump, fine. But I have to be made to feel as though I'm an outsider in my own home state. I was born in this state. I paid taxes to fund very, very minuscule percentage, mind you, of the infrastructure that I feel like I'm not even welcome in anymore. How is that fair?
Can I just say thank you, because I imagine it was very hard to share that in this shared space, and that I recognize you as a member of my community, and I have checked out Jordan Peterson from this library, so whatever our thoughts are from it, I just want to say thank you so much, because standing in a room and sharing that experience about yourself takes bravery, and I appreciate it.
I just wanted to ask about where where potential collaboration with community-run libraries has a place in this. I know Iowa City has the LGBTQ Iowa Archives and Library, but within legal statutes and such, how can school and school administrators and teacher librarians interact with their own community libraries who might potentially be a runaround, at least for students, or if there were enough students to kind of create their own community library and create their own kind of lending library amongst themselves, like how do you kind of manage that? Are you allowed to speak about that? How, are you allowed to facilitate that? Because those are done, on a personal level outside of what the school or in the future what a public library is able to do, and it's done outside of government funding. But since you're not allowed to speak about certain things like that, how do you mitigate the banning of that information, kind of? Sorry, that was really roundabout.
It's a brilliant question. I'm looking forward to your thoughts. I have some, but I want to hear yours first.
I feel like there should be a space where the promotion and advocacy of public spaces can be promoted to schools. And I think that's such a great question. And I'm wondering, my mind is reeling right now. I'm thinking, how could that be disseminated in communities?
It shows you the importance of our community organizations and how we need to uplift them and resource them, but not at the exclusion of public services. So there's this beautiful balance that has to take place. So for example, there's the Iowa City Public Library's Bookmobile, and then there's Antelope, right? And both are great, and we have enough space that we need both. But theoretically, if the legislation continues to careen in the direction it's going, they may be like Obi-Wan, they may be our only hope, because they will not be subject to this, right? And so I think you've hit on something that I need to focus attention to, and I'm kind of jazzed about it.
I really like the second part of your question, too, about students kind of creating a space for themselves. That's a really good question. I'm going to marinate on that one.
Yeah, I'm like, we need to coffee scrum this later. Yeah.
Well, and I was just going to jump in. It's an interesting idea, because at the same time, I would love to see that. Mm-hmm. I also I don't want to see the community have to come up with a solution to a problem that should never have been created in the first place, if that makes sense. So, it's something that I've talked about with this group before. The term book ban, like Sam has talked about how they don't like to use that term, and there are more precise terms that talk about what's taking place. But at the same time, a book being removed from a school library for some of those students is very much a ban. Yeah. Because that is their only opportunity, their only access to that book. It is very much seeing the issue from a place of privilege to assume that a kid can hop on Amazon, that a kid can run out to Barnes & Noble or Prairie Lights, that they can even get down here safely whenever they want to get a book. And so I think we need to make sure that we are maintaining this access and the school library access. At the same time, we can look for workarounds in the short term, and that's a wonderful idea. So I just don't want us to lose sight of that, trying to, again, solve something that shouldn't have happened in the first place.
Well, and Josh, you may speak to this way better than me, but I think sometimes we say ban and we actually mean erasure. Like, we aren't using that justification for the books we like. We're using that justification of hopping onto Amazon for the books that we don't want to hold space for, which I think is a form of erasure. Am I right? Am I close? Yeah? Yeah, it can be. Yeah.
It depends on your definition.
Yeah, right.
Thanks so much for this, and thanks for the work you all are doing and inspiring others to do. I wanted to ask something very specific. I am, among other things, a comics scholar. I teach courses on comics and study comics. I was recently the president of the Comic Studies Society. And one of the things I and my colleagues have noticed is that comics have gotten, this is another version of, we thought we were done with this, and here it comes again. That comics are getting targeted in very specific ways, and the most sort of notorious example is perhaps that in Texas, it's got a lot of attention that there was a banning of the Diary of Anne Frank, and people said, how, you know, of all books to be banned, you know, how could this be banned? And they clarified, oh, no, the text is fine, it's the illustrated version, it's the graphic novel version. It's the pictures that are the problem, the words we're okay with. And some of you certainly may know Maya Kobabe's Genderqueer, which is also one of the most commonly banned books. Before it got that attention, I taught it twice in 2 different classes. It's a very sweet, gentle book. There was no objection from a single student. And then it was sort of surprising to me, this is the one that's getting this sort of attention. And increasingly, you know, some of us think, oh, it's this old divide come back again. Oh, it's the pictures. There, you know, historical periods where a novel might be fine, but the movie version was more controversial. And I get a sense that we're going back to that division, that the pictures are dangerous, even if the words, although we're getting all these, you know, text banned as well, but the pictures are dangerous when the words are okay. I wonder if any of you have comments on the way, and this is a library, among others, which has a large comics and manga collection. It's very popular, I know.
I absolutely love comics. They were my gateway because I'm dyslexic, and so I didn't want to read. And in my old library, you had to read by minutes to get summer reading prize. You had to read certain books to get summer reading prizes. So like my siblings would blow past it, and like 2 months later, I'm still on book 1, and I felt a little salty. I'm not gonna lie. So comics were wonderful for me, and they're powerful because of their economy of language, right? Because you have less to work with, so you have to be very precise in your speech. And so I do think sometimes we undercut the precision of speech and economy of language and lexicon in graphic novels. And my answer for the graphic novel and visual depiction is the same for the written. Was Anne Frank a child when she faced those experiences? Okay, but a child can't experience it through a third-person narrative because we don't want to prepare them for the world as it is sometimes? That's my question, because the tuition is much cheaper if I can read about this graphically or through text, and I can explore this safely in the powerful tool that is a book. And so I hear what you're saying, and it makes me think about the great work of the Comic Book Defense League, right? And so thank you for what you're doing. That was really rambly. I think I'm getting tired.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I was just going to say, I appreciate the sort of multimodal focus of your question because I think it's a really valid one. And I don't have much to contribute beyond like a very sincere confirmation. I remember looking at the top 10 list of most challenged books from the American Library Association, and it's typically 50% plus that are because of LGBTQ plus content in them. And then I remember one year, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I was looking, I was like, oh, almost every single one of them is a graphic narrative of some sort. Right, and I think that's because when these sort of different types of text, you know, verbal and visual text work together, it locks in interpretation in a different way, right? Whereas a text might lend itself towards flowery literary language that gives this movement outside of the explicit sex or sex act that is sort of listed in this band. I think some of that can be eroded, or that possibility for saying, oh, that's not what it is. Right, it's actually a cracked plate from Their Eyes Were Watching God. It's not, you know, a virginity moment. And so I do think there's something really important there, right? And I don't have like a great answer, but I think it is about the interpretive capacity of comics and how in Fun Home, when you see these particular scenes, it's very hard to sit there and say, oh, no, it's a metaphor. So that's something I'm thinking a lot about. What are the affordances of the literary in this moment? How can we interpret our way into agency, into spaces of exploring queerness and different ways of being in the world? And I think comics provide us a particular nexus for doing that. That's complicated, and there's a lot to explore.
And there's an emerging theory here as I'm listening to you that, we actually had to fight to get fiction into libraries. I don't know if you all remember that time in our history, but fiction was extra. And so I do think there's some maybe echoes historically of the puritanical utilitarian purpose of literature, and that actually it's meant to be enjoyed. You can learn and enjoy at the same time. It can be an art piece and it can be an informational piece. And I think sometimes we struggle to reconcile with that. I won't name names, but okay, I will. My parents. When I would go into a public library, they would say, but that's a graphic novel, honey. And I had my heart broken when I couldn't check them out. And sometimes that might happen. I'm not saying it happens here, but it might happen, and it still sort of breaks my heart because I think folks think that reading has to result in a specific outcome, and that outcome is sometimes not enjoyment, which is sad.
I was just going to build on what you said earlier, Josh, that one of the tactics that it seems that those who want to ban books take is to take things out of context. And I think it's very easy to do that with an image that might represent one thing, but in the context of the narrative that's being told, a very different thing. Going back to the This Book is Gay that we were looking at, the complaints about that were largely pictures of a penis that somebody had drawn as if children had never seen one before. And it wasn't within the context of what was being told, the information that was being shared. It was simply, look at what your children are being shown. And that was a lot easier than trying to find nuance or strip the nuance out of a block of text. And so I think that's one of the reasons why graphic representation seemed to be singled out as much. Sorry, Josh. Go ahead.
No, I also just forgot, in terms of the actual law, SF 496, so a lot of this legislation is drag and drop, meaning some very big group, which Keenan Crow talked about so beautifully yesterday. So again, I'm go watch it. It's going to help contextualize so much more than I'm able to do. But a lot of the legislation is drag and drop. They change the name of the state. They push it through the legislature. One of the things that has been amended within this particular language in SF 496 is that it is very clear when it talks about a sex act that it includes visual depictions. And I believe that was something that was added a bit later just to speak to sort of your concerns as being incredibly valid ones.
I just by nature have to find something positive in all of this. And Sherman Alexie, whose book, Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, is one of the most banned of all time. In the 25th anniversary edition, he had an epilogue, which I found just wonderful. He said, notice that people are so interested in banning books, yet they let their kids have cell phones where they can access all the pornography ever made. And he said it really testifies to how powerful books are. And that's a good thing. They're worth fighting for in ways that cell phones probably aren't. The other thing he said is in his family, they call banned books week Big Ass Royalties Week, because his royalties just skyrocket every time this comes up. Thanks so much for this.
Thank you.
You bring up a good point. As a parent of children, I'd rather them read a book about body development and puberty through a thoughtfully written out book with diagrams and whatnot than having them go to Google and look up things themselves, because that is, they talk about age appropriate, depending on what their search terms are, right? And depending on the filters or what device they're using, what's going to come back may not be something that they can appropriately digest and understand. And I want to be very, hold space for my children and what they're experiencing, and making sure that they have access to reliable information.
And I mean, I don't need this, but I started off as a library marketer. And so when you talk about that Streisand effect with books, right? So we want to cover it up, and so then it actually becomes more popular. There's a hope for me that that happens with libraries too, right? That folks get engaged in their school libraries and their public libraries. They use it, they understand their policies, they volunteer, and they resource them in ways that impact their lives greatly.
So, Dr. Coleman, you are one of the only people who really mentioned kids in this. And I want to hear a little bit more about what is the knowledge, like what is happening in terms of what teachers are saying about how kids are responding and taking this up. And thank you, also you shared about the 2 students who were on the committee. So our trans students, our queer students, our students who identify as part of the LGBTQIA+, our children of color, our Black kids, our Indigenous children, our Muslim children, our, all, and to think that Iowa is a space where these communities do not exist is false. We are here, we've been here, and also this identity is never one thing. You're never just one of those things. But I do want to hear how are kids being taken care of? I understand that this is a conversation about the grown-ups, but I think like fundamentally, I want to know the children and their families who are having to understand that your school library is closed, you don't have and I guess I ask you, Josh, because you are talking to teachers and librarians, and I'm wondering what narratives are coming up about the babies in it.
I know. Oh, it's so hard for me to talk about this without getting quite emotional, because it's really horrific. As a researcher, this is the hardest project I've ever had to do, to witness people talk about how young people have to deal with this, right? People are leaving the state, right, to keep their kids safe so that they can just basically be recognized as humans, right, in school and library settings. And I hear it over and over and over again, and I don't want to share some of the words because it's just too much to kind of bear, and some days I'm like holding it together like a, kind of broken vase that's glued together, and that might be today. So, how are the babies? I know, Dr. Block, we've talked about this. I had asked the internal review board here to be able to talk to young people, and we disagreed on what ethics looked like around that. So all of my stories come from teachers and librarians who are working with young people. And it is a wide gamut, right? Some kids are fine. Some kids aren't noticing at all. I spoke with someone who heads a GSA, and there was a lot of energy there to push back, to make sure that while in this person's district, she did not have the capacity to put up a pride flag in her school zone. Again, something that if you read the letter of the law, this was a secondary context, it really isn't there. But she can put up things from clubs. She can put up student work. So she had all kinds of symbols representing queer and trans kids, right, in that class. And that was something that she created space for and invited young people to do, and the young people took it up and they took it into other spaces. So there is agency happening. I so feel the huge void of not being able to talk to young people, but I also don't know how I'd be able to do that work and stand up every day, to be perfectly honest. There's a lot happening.
So we'll take, oh, sorry, Jackie,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to add that this is also coming on the back of the law of medical care being taken away. And I feel like I cannot speak for the children in my life who have been impacted. I just feel like it's unfair for me to say that, because I so fiercely love and want to protect them. And teachers do that every day. And unfortunately, in some districts, they're also being told that they can't communicate to parents about what's happening. Teachers are being told they cannot say, your child no longer has access to these books. So that again is different from community to community, and that's very harmful. And then in some cases, I just heard a story today where when a student asked for a book that had to be removed, they're able to say that book's been removed because of SF 496. So, I mean, it's going to start to snowball from here, because January 1st is really the deadline for the removal of books. So the work is happening now. It's maybe not being communicated clearly to communities, which is one reason I was looking forward to being part of this panel, is just to talk about the fact that paying attention and asking questions of people that you know doing this work, those stories are going to help. Hopefully people listen and care more, because it matters.
So we'll take this last question.
So I'm going to school to be an English educator, and I'm really interested in, you guys kind of already talked about this, but what agency do students have in schools and outside of schools? And what can caring adults and educators do to support those students in and outside of schools? Are banned book groups allowed outside of schools? Do students have access to that? If you guys have any insight, what are means that educators can do to support their students during this time?
Well, obviously, we know this is coming for public libraries, but I feel like we should get it going while it getting's good and provide that robust support that the schools no longer can. And I'm watching public libraries around the state step up to the call. Academic collections have always been deep in curriculum and needs-based, while libraries have been broad. And I think that we're seeing maybe a need to make those collections a little deeper in order to sustain the access to those materials. So I'm really heartened by that. But then I would just suggest that we need to support our children in their activism by living that example. We have to show up to council meetings. We have to show up to school board meetings. We do not have to have children in that school district to care, obviously, because I've noticed often that we don't have to have children in that school district to try to ban the books. And so I recall that while I will never be a parent, this is my community. And so I'm going to try to walk my values.
Yeah, to Sam's point, in the legislation, it specifically says that you only have to be in the community. You don't have to have kids in the community, and you can also remain anonymous if you want to challenge a book. But to your point, you know, like there are little free libraries in town. You know, I have to speak from my own little experience here, but you know, there are dozens of little free libraries, and people are starting to fill those with banned books and making that known. There's groups like the Annie's Foundation in Des Moines that Sam had talked about. Again, they're end arounds in terms of making sure that kids have access to materials that might otherwise not be available to them. But in addition to just showing support, showing up, making your voice heard, and taking steps like that to make sure that kids do have access to these things, that they might not be able to get them in school, which is the absolute best place for them to get it, so that they have the context of talking with a librarian or with a teacher. But if that's being taken away, we can find other ways to get that material to them.
I would also say that I talk a lot with my school library students as well about how having an adult in the room, an adult in the space who can create a safe teaching environment and in a safe space is really important. So although there's this erasure happening and there's this removal happening, you're a human being who is creating an environment in your classroom, and you can create an environment that shows those students that every single one of them matters to you. It's a really important thing to build in your community.
Josie, thank you for your beautiful question. It's always a delight as someone who's had the joy of being your professor. One thing that I would say, there are awesome, awesome people throughout this state. There are folks who are fighting every day in ways that aren't often spotlighted or seen, and some of those people are young people, right? Young people have organized walkouts in this state to protest books being pulled from shelves in different contexts. And a lot of that organization happens online. So one place I would say to go, Iowa WTF. Fantastic resource. Young people are running it. Young people are moving and shaking, right? And there are a number of other spaces like that where people are building ideas, right? When teachers can't necessarily take the risk that they might want to and keep their job. So I do think that teachers can have a huge role in actually building pedagogy that invites queer people into conversations, people of color into conversations, people with disabilities into conversations, trans people into conversations, right? There are strategies for doing that from a teacher perspective, but also if we rely on student agency and create space for them to explore and to be, they can absolutely change the landscape of what is happening in this state. So connect with them. Online is great. If that's who you are, go on TikTok, go on Instagram. Like, the young people are really awesome. So, Josie, that would be sort of my recommendations for you.
How many C's are in TikTok? I'm writing that down.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank our fabulous panelists. So, round of applause.